it's yours. Yes.
Vielen Dank. Thank you so much. I'm originally from Frankfurt, lived in Paris and Brussels for almost 20 years, and now 20 years in the US, so highly qualified on this topic, but if I'm not, my team is, I promise you that. My company, Global Quantum Intelligence, is the leading provider of investor due diligence on quantum computing vendors. We work with all the large investors, governments around the globe on doing due diligence, and when I say we do due diligence, it really encompasses, commercial, market, strategic, all the way to the very scientific. We've been doing this since 2018, and you'll see some of our frameworks. My background is in management consulting. We're framework and data people, at least we try to be. So all of these little buckets that you see, playbooks is interactive, up-to-date data analysis that we feed into our frameworks. The quantum market model, that's your TAM, your SAM, your SOM, your addressable market. Business models, of course, we just heard this from Electron, what the business model for quantum computers might be. Some of them are in the cloud, some as a service, some on-premise. Where in the quantum computing stack, we'll talk about that a little bit more, the value is generated, and then we get very, very technical. We've done due diligence on 26 of the leading quantum computing hardware vendors, and we'll break this down a little bit, how the US or North America in general compares to Europe. Very specifically, we just finished a project last week where we looked at 7 companies that have been identified by our partner NATO as potentially being able to run the Shor algorithm. And that means, of course, breaking all known encryption. We call this a cryptographically relevant quantum computers here, QC. NATO, of course, with NIF, the NATO Investment Fund, has a national security interest here, and wants to know what does it really take to run Shor. So not just, but get quantum use cases, business use cases, as we just saw, into production, but actually break encryption, and which vendor roadmaps could theoretically at least get there. So we identified out of these 26 companies, and I have data on 6 of them, the 7th one is still being wrapped up, on 7 of these companies, 2 out of the US, 1 out of Canada, 4 out of Europe, but only 1 of them within the European Union. So you can guess where the other 3 are. And yeah, I think we looked, so due diligence again means we follow this process that I shared on the previous slide, which includes actually going on site with, not a sledgehammer, but a screwdriver. And we have people that look at the IP, the science, the publications, but the hardware across that whole stack. What this broke down to, if you want to break Shor, you really need to get the clock speed or the runtime necessary to run Shor. And we know exactly what that means. We can quantify this. And that's relatively easy. But getting that clock speed as a consequence of the trade-off of either physical footprint, capex, or energy consumption, or combination of those 3 factors, is almost impossible. So is it possible to build a cryptographically relevant quantum computer? Yes. Is it possible to build one that is realistically, small enough, and by small enough we mean smaller than a little town, affordable enough, and we're in the tens of billions of dollars here, and energy consumption, it was in the press in Forbes, I believe, a few months ago, where somebody suggested we might need a nuclear power plant. So this is the trade-off that we looked at. I'll skip, and I also can share some of the technical data, but just to give you a little glimpse of what this looks like. But there are hundreds and hundreds of spreadsheets and pages of analysis behind it, where we normalize all of this data. And this data is a combination of the data that we get from the public research, from our analysis, and then it's validated by these 26 vendors. And when I say validated by these 26 vendors, PsiQuantum, all the way Jeremy O'Brien, the CEO, but not just Jeremy, his head of engineering, his head of science, his head of software, and so forth. This is our hardware stack. The hardware stack broadly, according to us, the way we view it on the very left, of course you have the qubit plane, that's where the quantum magic happens, right? And we're starting, not we, but the industry is starting to get pretty good at it. You have the control plane, quantum error correction, and then at the very top, algorithms and use cases. Of course, you want to be all of this to be green. Green means it's in production, it's at maturity. Dark red would mean, and we don't have any dark red anymore, which is a huge breakthrough here. Last year we still had a lot of dark red. Light red means it's a lab POC, but it hasn't transitioned from the lab into a more stable environment yet. So you can tell that according to these Shore criteria, these vendors have made very good progress on the qubit plane. At the middle and at the top of the stack, there's still a lot of progress to be made. So this is what this looks like. On this slide, we call this a challenge pathway. The next slide is going to be a timeline. Pathway means that some of these vendors, and we can't share the names, but I tried to put the little flags next to it. Challenge pathway means that some of these will scale much easier in an earlier regime, but then struggle scaling farther down the road, or vice versa. And when I say regime, this actually comes out of the UK quantum ecosystem. If you look at the bottom of this chart, QOP is quantum operations per seconds, which feeds back to this clock time, runtime for quantum computing. And when we look at the roadmaps and the milestones that these vendors are able to share after the due diligence, you can see that certain of them, if you look at the red one here, which is one of the non-EU but European vendors, they will do very well in the next kind of 3 to 5 years in scaling their architecture, but then they really fall off, only having incremental, and that's the left axis. This is an incremental challenge, an engineering challenge, or a scientific challenge. They will really struggle to continue to scale it, which is largely due to the power footprint and CapEx demands, more so than the qubit scaling. And others have the inverse curve, right? The yellow one especially, which I like, which is a US company. In terms of timeline, and there are many roadmaps out there, right? Quantum advantage, quantum utility, quantum supremacy, 27, 28, 29, 30. The first realistic, and this is an ideal scenario, if they were able to really deliver on what they promised, the first realistic cryptographically relevant quantum computer could be built by a Canadian company by 2030. And again, this is an ideal world. Nothing is ever ideal. But if you're planning for this as a nation or a large infrastructure provider, you have to kind of assume this worst case, reasonable worst case scenario. And then you see it goes all the way to 2038. Our EU friends are in 2032. We actually put them in the top 3, both in terms of pathway, challenge pathway, as well as timeline. So you see the distribution here, how these companies are able to scale over time. In terms of challenges along this path, we break it down again along this stack, and I try to include a couple emojis where we felt that the European, especially the EU-based vendor, might have some perceived strengths or weaknesses. At the qubit plane, there isn't that much differentiation anymore. And I said we did the due diligence on 26 vendors. We started this in 2018. If you did due diligence 2-3 years ago, there was still a real difference in the qubit quality. Today, all of the leading vendors have almost the same gate fidelities, gate speeds, and other performance metrics. So at the qubit level, we're competitive. There is one issue when it comes to strategic materials. The materials and the sourcing of these materials that go into building the hardware stack. And that's something that is being less addressed, we believe, in the European Union and by the vendors based here than by some of the US or UK based, we can just say it, counterparts. When you go up the stack, we definitely see a lack of distributed quantum computing in Europe. That's a really big hot topic, and anywhere else where we go, and people are working on the interconnects, the connectivity, and the networking of the quantum computers. That is something that we don't see at that same scale and quality in Europe yet. The full stack integration and the ability to do your own quantum error correction, mitigation, suppression, your own control readout and so forth, is definitely also lacking in the US, in Europe, as is resource estimation. Where we do see more efforts and maybe more success in the European Union is towards the top of the stack, especially when it comes to hybrid deployments, hybrid algorithms, algorithm work, and use cases. I was having a conversation with Jasper from Airbus earlier today. On the user side, especially Germany, we believe is probably leading in the world, and that's something where other regions invest much less. So jury is out. We don't have a final conclusion here. It's definitely a little bit of a mixed picture with mixed opportunities, mixed weaknesses, and mixed strengths. Yep, and that's kind of it. We'll take the rest of the time for questions.
Perfect.